At the core of spiritual drama is something referred to by so many different names, but I'll call it for the moment self-absorption. We are always on our mind. We are always thinking about ourselves. Everything is referred back to the me or the I. How am I doing? I'm tired. I'm this, I'm that. So in a sense, we are constantly supporting and reinforcing this idea that we somehow exist, and that existence is, in a sense, independent of everyone else. Self-absorption, in a way, denies the value, the place, the importance of everyone else, in that they all take a position just slightly or in a very major way beneath you or above you. There's a sense that you are at the center of the universe and exceedingly important. And in a way, the spiritual journey, certainly the journey of Advaita Yoga, non-dualistic awareness, is to get out of that trap. To get out of thinking that somehow you are that important. The danger of a lot of the practice that we do, the Rudy practice, is that it has the potential to make you more important. That you grow in accomplishment, you grow in a sense of capacity to function in the world, to do. You attain a certain kind of increased awareness. And the sense of self, rather than releasing its power over you, somehow becomes invested in this thing that I would call self-regard. Self-regard is a kind of subtle, sly way of reinforcing your centrality to things, that you are somehow quietly, deeply within a good person, a worthy person. I am kind, compassionate, loving, giving, all of these things. And we think of that as, well, wow, that's my spiritual attainment. I've become compassionate and giving and self-serving and all of these things that we all strive to become. But in a very subtle underpinning, they are a new identity. They also make you, in a sense, separate from others. It doesn't have to do that, but often it does do that. That there's a kind of, I'm a good guy. I am whatever you use, whatever you say. I'm a spiritual person. I've attained something. I've gotten rid of all the baggage. I've surrendered everything that doesn't mean anything. I'm an open, extraordinarily good person, which is great. Great. It's a great way to live. But I'm saying to you, it's still a kind of subtle entrapment, in that you really feel there's a you who has something, that has attained something, that is somehow other than the totality. Spiritual evolution, if you want to call that, is not a getting to a certain place. It's a realization of the place you already are. There are many, excuse me, many approaches to arriving at realization. Generally speaking, it is an event that just occurs. A sudden clarity. I often describe it as being at the optometrist and they keep saying 1 or 2, 1 or 2, 1 or 2, 1, and you go, oh, you can read all the lines. It's all there, it's clear. It's really simple. But just sitting and meditating will not by itself bring you into a realization of your true nature. It can, but a lot of spiritual meditation, sitting, quietude, brings you a kind of peace of mind, a kind of less stressful internal life, but it kind of leaves you there as someone who has peace. Nothing wrong with this, but there is a deeper truth. I hate to use the word truth, but a knowing that everyone who reaches a certain degree of spiritual practice is on the verge of knowing. You can either await its arrival, or you can do something which people call inquiry. You can look into, what am I? Who am I? You can make an actual effort and saying, what really am I? What is this? How did this arrive? Not so much the question of how, honestly, it's really, what is this? I was not an inquiry person. My snap, if you will, the moment of awakening, did not take place because of inquiring. It took place in a way because I stopped inquiring. I really arrived at a moment where I said, I give up. I cannot figure it out. I cannot get there. I don't know where there is. I just let go. I just said, I'm fine as I am, is basically what I said. I'm happy to let it just be this. At which point, to my great surprise, the person who had been seeking all of these years and decades ceased to be. Not that he died or fell totally by the wayside. He just lost his primacy. There was no longer anyone there trying to get anywhere. Somehow there was a knowing that this was where I was, where this was what was. It was an absolute realization that it wasn't an I in anything. It was just, there was this, just this, and that this was all the truth I could know, that could be known. There was no struggle, there was no seeking, there was no reaching, there was no asking. It was just, aha. There's an enormous awareness that comes in that. Nisargadatta, the great Advaita yogi, says, in knowing that I am nothing, there is wisdom. In knowing that I am everything, there is love. That's kind of what it comes down to. In being nothing, and knowing that you're nothing, and you know I've been talking about that a lot in the last so many months, there's a sense of extraordinary freedom in that. But there's also this remarkable non-dualistic sensibility that nothing is all there is, meaning it's everything that is. And your reaction to everything is a kind of embrace. There's just this embrace of everything. And everyone that's there, everyone as being the totality. It's not something that is cognated or conceptualized or analyzed. It's just, oh, I am looking at myself, or in another sense, the self is witnessing itself through these eyes. Smelling itself through this nose, hearing itself through these ears. It's just happening. And each of us who feels separate are slowly going to wake up to the fact that we're not separate at all. We are the happening, the thing that is. Whatever that is, we are collectively this one thing. And one can go on and on saying this to you, but my objective is not to go, hey, look, Bruce is talking about something that he has, is to talk about what we are, and hopefully to inspire you to know that. But it won't necessarily be known in some kind of casual, come to class every Sunday and I'll get it, because it's not like that. It's really either a huge, as Nisargadatta would call it, an earnest effort, meaning consuming on some level and really important. Or it's a kind of inquiry that asks this question endlessly, until you go, oh. Or, in my case, until you go, I give up. Because there's no answer as such. The answer is not this, the answer is none of this. It's an answer that the mind suddenly goes, I can't ever get it. I will never know it, and it kind of just releases itself from the effort. That's a remarkable thing. Because our minds want to own everything. They want to own the journey, they want to own us. The mind wants to have an understanding, a conception of, a grasp on nature of being, and it cannot and does not. It's a tool that doesn't function in that realm. It cannot give you ultimate understanding. Ultimate understanding precedes mind. And the only way to really start to look into that is to watch your mind. Watch it. And what's so interesting when you watch your mind is that you see where it owns you. You see where it grabs you. And I can look into all of you and see it. I can see the mind grabbing. And sometimes it grabs you from the very beginning of the sitting in this class and just holds on. And sometimes for moments it really does let go. And in that moment, the knowing in this space floods into you. This not having, not owning, this being just goes, it goes right to where there's an emptiness, right to where there's a space. It just goes, and the feeling when that happens, the connection when that happens, is so beautiful, because it sees that it's going in unprocessed. It's not going into the mind first, which is owning and analyzing and working with it. It just goes right in. And every one of you has a moment in here, in this class, where that takes place. It sees itself, it knows itself, it just pops right in. And then somewhere out of a kind of laziness or a kind of habitual nature, there's a recognition of, oh, that was nice. Oh, I got it. Oh, I just had that. Oh, that was great. Or whatever it is that happens for a person who wants to acknowledge this unbelievably beautiful flow. There's a thing that grasps for it. And that grasping is, in the end, the kind of diminishment of it, the taking of whatever that truth is and making it into something very small and innocuous, when in fact it's everything. But it's so subtle, it's so simple, that the mind thinks it can demolish it, it can analyze it. Rudy used to say the mind is the slayer of the soul. Well, it's really the slayer of this very simple dynamic of just being, the being that underlies everything. So pervasive, so present, so constant, that we don't realize it. We don't see it because it's not filled with the noise and distraction of activity and the me and the mind that wants to own everything that happens. This self-regard, oh look, I have found something so beautiful. Oh look what I am. Immediately you've owned it. Immediately you're caught in the mindful grasp of something that doesn't want to be grasped or need to be. So real inquiry stares at that. It watches it happen. And it's really interesting because as you sit there and you see the mind come into play, you see it taking this for its own purpose, its own value. You just look at it and you go, no, no. I don't need to have this. No, shh, shh, shh. And if you do that, it's really interesting because the mind recognizes your primacy, if you will. When I say you, I don't mean you ego mind. I mean your witnessing energy, your conscious energy, or more deeply, your awareness. All of this exists within awareness. The awareness is what observes the mind. It doesn't observe the mind by analyzing it. That's the mind looking at the mind. It observes it in a state of absolute quiescence. But it's a very powerful stillness. And it can watch this thing rising, and by not giving it any attention, which is consciousness, it doesn't formulate, it doesn't conceptualize, it doesn't turn into something that grabs you, it just passes through. The most powerful thoughts, weird thoughts, creative thoughts, beautiful thoughts, horrific thoughts, pass through the mind all the time. There's no need to take hold of any of them, not a single one. Just to let it pass, just let it pass, let it flow. And if you start to do that, you will discover who you are. The most important discovery is that you are not your mind. You are not the drama of your life. You are not the thoughts that come up and you suddenly grab hold of because they've been so meaningful and important to you your whole life. Of course, that's the defining me. Whatever it is, this guilty thing, the shame thing, this gorgeous, beautiful thing, whatever it is that grabs you, that's your mind in action. And that's your mind trying to, for whatever reason, run the show. And you give it permission totally out of habit since you were so big. And you can't stop that from happening. I mean, I look at my grandchildren and I go, can I abort that experience? Can I free them from having to grab on to, I am this, I am that? No, you cannot, nor should you. Because they have to go on this ride like we all do. They're on the ride of, I am everything. I am this, I am that, I am separate from this, I am more than that. We all go through it. And if you're lucky in this life, something says to you, whoa, this isn't it. This is not it. And I really do feel there's a kind of a guiding principle that will take everybody there in time. I was looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, very interesting formulation, and how hard it is to get to the place of self-actualization or self-transcendence. It's a pyramid as it's described in many of the interpreters of Maslow, not in his own writing, but there are all these base level things that have to be taken care of, and then you start to build up this even self-regard, this sense of self-satisfaction, all of these things until you arrive at the time where you are ready to go, it's not the answer. There's something more. And that is when this inquiry really begins. And you can mess up on it. You can go into a million schools of meditation and yoga and walk out of every one of them with a degree and a diploma and a title, you know. You can now change your name to Swami this or Swami that, you know, or His Holiness this, or whatever it is that you are given. And that's still not it, because it's still you with a title. You with a diploma, you with a certificate, a recognition. No. You need to go deeper than that. And this practice that we're doing right now is an invitation to that. And I don't know how I can get you there without you taking your own responsibility for this deep inquiry. Who am I? Nisargadatta will say, anything that locks in to a knowing, you have to let go of. Anything that basically says, I am this or I am that, he says, no. No. Anything you can label or you can define, no. You're not that. Of course, at some point he would say, of course, you're all of that. But in the pursuit of who am I, there really is this powerful sense that none of the above works. Because if you define yourself as your body, as your mind, as your spirit, as anything, there is a sense of knowing it. And what really does happen, and what happened when the awakening took place for me, was no. There was none of that worked. There was no mind left to distinguish it. The freedom of that is remarkable. And that is what we are all here to learn. I was talking to a friend the other day, and he was saying, this is either an invitation or a discourse. He says a discourse is meaningless. It's an invitation. It's an invitation to wake up, an invitation to take this seriously, an invitation to understand that there's nothing to be found, there's nothing to get, there's nothing that you will walk away from. There's basically only a release of the idea that you can have anything, or that there's a you to have it. And it's so hard cognitively to get what I'm talking about. And in fact, that's part of how this awakening took place here, because people were talking. I was at a conference and everyone was talking about how to do this. How do you get there? What do you do? And it made no sense to me. I couldn't figure it out. I kept listening. I said, clearly there's no way I'm ever going to get it. And that was the key. Because there is no way you're going to get it. It's when you truly surrender. Rudy said, you don't surrender this and that and this and that. You surrender everything. You surrender. When you really surrender, you're not surrendering to something, you're surrendering to no thing. And you become what you've always been, which is a remarkable nothing. And I know that can't be attractive to the ego mind. There's nothing attractive about becoming nothing. Excuse me. But it's not like you become nothing. You discover that's all you are. You're nothing. And So who wants that? Well, if you don't want it, don't come here. Because I can't offer you something. There's nothing to be gained, literally, no thing to be gained. What you gain, however, in being nothing, is realization of your true self. Of your true, infinite, eternal, unmanifested self, which at this very moment is finite and manifested. What's the value of this? Why would anybody bother to discover that they're nothing? Well, the way a lot of people put it is that being something is so insufficient that it brings about enormous suffering. The idea that you have to get somewhere or become something in order to have happiness or joy or peace is a source of enormous suffering, because it means who you are now isn't sufficient. What you are in this moment isn't enough. It isn't right. And that misunderstanding causes ongoing suffering for everybody. The idea of arriving at this moment, at this not knowing, not a future anything, at this moment, is the doorway, if you will, to all there is and no thing at all, where you are the vastness of the universe and the minute form of an atom at the same time, where there is no absolute, everything is relative. There's nothing that can be known or said that will satisfy, because you are beyond that. You just are. And trust me, you are. That's the one thing you know, right this moment, you are. I just want you to know that. You are now. Now. One more time. If this perplexes you to the point of distraction, you will do one of two things: literally not come back, or allow this thing to create a depth of puzzlement that will lead to liberation. Your choice. But at some point, you will know what is being said here. You will go, oh. And then there's enormous clarity, and the person that has been here seeking something will disappear. There will be nobody left to look for anything. You will be that. And that, in truth, you are that right this second. And not to know that either is liberating or makes you crazy. And it will make you crazy until you know it. And that's a good thing. It's a good thing. So, nothing I'm saying here is new, by the way. I know you know that. You've heard it before. Nothing is new. Having it penetrate, having it get in there, having it do its thing is what's essential. And anything that doesn't help you in that direction is just spinning wheels. It's just kind of wasting time. It's worth getting to. Any questions?
I understand what you're saying about crazy, makes you crazy. Then for me it's progressed to sort of lost. I would say lost, like I picture a movie where you're an astronaut is cut off and going out into space. Right. And I was hoping to attain, the spiritual and the physical a more solidity, like all of a sudden you would feel solid. I'm the spiritual in the physical, and I'm solid inside and out. But I don't feel that. I feel I've gone from crazy to lost, like lost in space. Can you speak to that?
Sure. In terms of, if you want progress and talk in those terms, that's a good progress to make. The part that's lost is a fragment of separateness, because when that part disappears, there's no one to be lost. The sadness, the whatever, the the fearfulness of being lost in space is there's an I and space. But when the I goes boop, there's only space. There's no one to be lost. There's no one who will feel somehow cut off or somehow not connected to that which gives security and grounding and solidity. And the part that wants that is the part that is like the little child crying, what about me, what about me? It's the mind holding on to its foundational sense of being separate and in support of you and in direction of you and in providing safety and clarity and all of these things that the mind appears to do. But in truth, the mind is the problem. It's really the problem, and you can't know it's the problem until you sit and watch the mind. And there's no better place to watch the mind than floating lost in space, because there's no other distraction. There's just space and this mind feeling lost. Watch it. What is it feeling? What are those feelings that are coming up? How real are they? Where do they come from? What is this thing that is manifesting as lost, and what are the sensations of being lost? And if you just stare at that, just observe it, you'll start to see how insubstantial that is, how locked in an ancient past that is, and how by just looking at it with a kind of detachment, it starts to break up. It just breaks up. There's nothing there but space. And if there's no you in it to feel lost, there's no emotional component, there's no fear, there's no hope, there's no ambition, there's just space. And the problem is, most of us feel, oh my God, where am I in that? You are space. Space, full or empty, however it is. You are that. But if you do not have a craving for identity in the middle of that, all of the suffering aspect goes like that, just goes away. So that's, in a sense, the inquiring that you need to do in a very simple space, which is a lot easier than trying to do inquiring about, why don't so-and-so love me, and why can't I have these things that I don't have, and why didn't I get this in my life, and why did I get that, and I didn't deserve that. And that level of letting go is really hard, because it's so loud and noisy and boisterous. Letting go of being lost in space has its own dynamic, but it's simple. It's like, you're just there, you just look at that thing. Just look at that noise that starts to come up. It's clearly yours, it's not nobody else's. It's not coming from people outside, clamoring for your attention. Nothing's clamoring for your attention, but this tiny little voice that's, what about me, I don't like it here, I'm upset. Whatever that thing is, if you look at it, it has no substance. It's self-created. It's manifesting as a voice because you have paid attention to it. Your consciousness of it makes it real. So if you just watch it, observe it without analyzing it, just be aware of it, it cries itself to sleep, basically. It self-soothes. It finally goes, and then there you are. Done. And if it should come back again, which it may, you can go, I've done this before. And you just do the same thing. Regard it. And it may come back. It does come back. My experience is definitely that there's this bruising going on, and I just go, okay. And you watch it, and it's really amazing how the mind tries to find its way back in so many forms. And the one that hit me this week, and I talked about it just a few minutes ago, was self-regard. Self-regard came back, and I went, oh, I never saw that. That was a very subtle mind form, thinking that I am, a good guy. I'm a spiritual teacher, whatever it is. I went, okay. I don't want to be held up by that. There's no need to identify with something like that. There's no need to identify with anything. I'd rather identify with you. I'd rather identify with that which is, rather than something that separates that, causes separation. So you learn to be aware. You don't even learn it. You are aware. Your awareness itself. And awareness will come back all the time and dissolve anything that's starting to manifest and form into something. That's how you do it. Does that help at all?
Well, I'm thinking of pain and suffering, as Rudy said, that's all nourishment. So it's always going to come up in your life. You're always going to be blindsided. And you have to transcend yourself again and again. And you spoke a few weeks ago about neutralize. And I went, okay, neutralize this pain. And then I go, okay, but you got to transcend it.
Well, but it depends on what you think of transcendent means.
Yeah, well, was my question. Neutralize, transcend. Is there any relation or?
Well, transcending means get above it, get away from it, but it still gives it enormous power. There it is, but I'm above it. You have to go into it and be one with it, and then it has no power. When you're one with the pain, there's no one fighting it. In other words, you're talking about being lost in space. You can also be lost in pain, or lost in desire, or lost in fear, or whatever it is. You can't go away from it and handle it, or deal with it. You have to go into it, or accept it, or look at it, or be observant of it, to really have the capacity to neutralize it, if you will. But you don't go into it so much to neutralize it. By going into it, you do neutralize it. Neutralizing is going into the thing itself rather than away, and being with it, in a sense, feeling it. I can say bring love to it, or understanding, or compassion, excuse me, but really it's just be with it. And it starts to neutralize. It starts to go, oh. Again, like the baby, self-soothing. I remember being in the crib and nobody coming. And I said, well, nobody's going to help me here. Nobody. And I had to do it. That's how it is. You have to go toward, not away, I think. Excuse me. That's what I recommend. Don't try to get into escape mode, because you can't escape this thing. You can only say yes to the totality. It's much more liberating than getting above it, getting around it, getting away from it. Now, does that make it even more?
Well, I get the concept that everything's one, and we're with you. You're like this tuning fork, and you resonate. So we see ourselves, and we see the one, and it's all one. And I've noticed when I read the newspaper now, I can flip through and instead of going, like, that terrible person did that terrible thing, it's like, that is me. Like I look at, I go, that is me. And it's like, wow.
Kind of, or that is nothing. You're doing this when you say one.
Yeah.
And can you do that? I mean,
Sorry.
I'm just trying to give you a sense of it's not an inclusive one. It's an exclusive totality. And so it's not something that's held, it's something that's let go of. My basic feeling is the owning of it being, of you owning it all. I'm the terrible person in the newspaper. Well, in a way, yes, you are all of that. But all of that, if you really just dig into it, all comes from a similar source. I mean, all the anger and frustration of the world. It goes back. I saw an opera the other night about Aeneid. It's called The Trojans by Berlioz. And it basically ends with all of the horrible tragedy of Troy becoming so much of the current tragedy that we have in the Middle East. And it all roots back into early, Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel. There's always the root stories of something starting to have conflict. And those early conflicts are at the source of the conflicts that happen today. They go on and on and on. So you go back to the root and you sort of make peace with the root. You make peace with that somewhere in all of this, some division happens, some kind of separation, some sense of me, I and thou. And in that separation is a source of the beginning of conflict. But it also happens for interesting reason. I don't know that we know the reason, but the reason seems to be that the universe wants to be. And it wants to be, and in becoming, has to become via opposites and conflicts that struggle and build and create itself. And I'm just throwing that out as an idea. It's not my idea, it's an old idea. But in that we have opposites, positives and negatives, and in the newspaper and the news and our theater and our opera and our movies, everything are about those conflicts. And we are totally engaged by them. Totally, whether they're in our specific human life or in the life of the fantasy and the literature around us. It's this conflict. And how do you go beyond that conflict? Well, by not being that conflict in yourself. And almost everybody is. And almost everybody says, I want to be out of this. I want peace. I want joy. I want liberation from all of this. But they want it on their terms in their bodily sense. It doesn't work that way. The realization is there was something that preceded Adam and Eve, if you will. There's something that happens, the fall of Troy, the fall of Troy, all about Helen, and an ego and mind. I mean, this has been going on forever. Go back to that place in yourself where your own division started. I'm looking at my granddaughter who started to break apart when her brother was born. Suddenly she's everything was perfect. It was perfect when it was just her. And now suddenly she has to share the world. We all share the world. And all of us get angry at that point. What about me? I was the firstborn. I was the most loved. Or I was the secondborn. Why didn't anybody love me? Why didn't I get what I was supposed to be? Or third or fifthborn. And their kids are going, I don't even count. It's like everybody's measured against something and nobody's satisfied. The spiritual arrival at none of this is anything but the establishment of something out of nothing. And if you can go back to core truth, you go, I get it. Not you don't even get it. You just see it. And you go back to that space before it all came into being, and then you watch it as it is, and you look at it with very compassionate eyes, because you see people today fighting battles that go back thousands of years, and you go, wow. And how do you unravel that? Well, the only way to unravel it is one person at a time, finding out who we are. That's all we can do. And so that's what we're doing sitting here. And it's a fearsome struggle on some level, and yet simple and beautiful on another. It's the journey. And we're all in it. And either you get there or you don't, and I feel in my bones that somewhere in the end everybody gets there. Because how could you not? Ultimately, we're all coming out of nothing. And at some point, you're going to go back to that. And you're either going to go back to that peaceably or not. It's an amazing thing to rediscover who you are. It may be one of the big aspects of manifesting it all, is that we all get this amazing journey back to truth. Anyone else? It's too many words. Yes?
A couple of things really, thank you, that was really beautiful. I try not to read the newspaper. A couple of things struck me. Well, one is what you talked about, laziness and habit. And since sitting for I guess 5 years now or so, even in the beginning, I could tell that the habit is just so habit forming. And the laziness, I've noticed that sometimes I can, through I guess being a little bit more present, I can feel it, that there's a shifting, a turning away from being present, mainly maybe just by laziness and stuff. I'm not sure what the question is, but I guess, about the levels of need that you said.
Maslow.
Like my basic levels are probably not very well taken care of, or, better than some, less than others maybe. And maybe it drags me back, but I remember reading in Carlos Castaneda and Don Juan saying to Carlos that, those kids that are, waiting for the tourists to leave their plates and licking them up have more chance of, for whatever words he used, achieving enlightenment and stuff. And it seems my movement forward now is actually kind of beyond maybe from the solid, but it's in a creative flow.
Yeah, Rudy had such a strong emphasis on growing, on making solid human beings. He wanted all of us to have careers. He wanted all of us to be effective in the world. And I really bought into that and do buy into that. I think it's a great thing to have whatever solidity you can find. But, life works at us, as human beings, and doesn't satisfy everything we hunger for or we want. And at some point you have to simply accept who you are as you are. And that's really essential. You can struggle and strive to get somewhere, and then you kind of get to the level that you can rise to. Is if you're eating, if you're breathing, if you clothe yourself, if you're basically housed and safe, that may be enough to lead you to the doorway of enlightenment. If you can have a big career and you can have success and you can have whatever else you want to think of, whatever the world offers, money, children, grandchildren in my case, you go, well, you have even more that would bring solidity, but in fact what I've also discovered is often what that brings is smugness, a certain satisfaction, a certain kind of a movement away from the spiritual, because you've got so much comfort temporarily in the world. One of the great things about hitting 70 for me was the realization that all the stuff you get, ultimately you have to let go of. Everything you have has to be dispersed, everything. And I began to think, well, why did I spend all these years acquiring stuff when I'm going to have to give it away so fast? It made zero sense to me. And it's like, there is a kind of a level of growth that you want to get to where you can really begin to see what's real and then begin to ask for clarity. Begin to ask for a way to understand, who am I? Wherever that occurs, however that occurs, that's where the real spiritual drama unfolds. And it's an extraordinary space to get to. I can only say, knowing you now for as long as I've known you, that I've seen growth just in this time. I've seen a kind of deepening of pursuit, of questioning, of asking, of being present, of arriving. That's what this is. Anything that buys you off of this track is going to be ultimately unsatisfying. Like I said, you can acquire the biggest houses in the world and all the yachts you want and private planes and all of that stuff. It ain't going to do it for you. It's not. I remember flying on private planes when I was in the Hollywood mode, and and I was with these people, and I would look at them and go, these are the most unaccomplished human beings on so many levels, and they felt so entitled. They felt so entitled. This is their plane, this is their stuff, they have this wealth, like they had earned it. It had nothing to do with earning, it had to do everything with how the universe was manifesting. There was no humility in it. They had everything, but they had no doorway to truth, as far as I could tell. They were, I don't want to badmouth them all, but they were on a downward spiral. They were not going to get there. Yes.
It's not that I want planes, or even though that creativity and all that would be nice. Is I'm kind of, I guess I seek normalcy. I feel that I'm not as, solid as other people. I was just reading a book about, anyway, it was about kind of manifestation of the female, the concept of God in the 70s and 80s, and talked about Jung. He actually talked about in some cases, it's, that getting enlightenment is much more important than being more adept at life. And I guess I'm reflecting some of what you're saying, getting to the root is remember, like when being a kid and being sick and you have no choice but to be present, and then that kind of, and letting go or feeling like something is pressing you. And I'm realizing as you talk, my laziness is like about, know me, like I want to know how to live life, but know me, like, and I guess at least I'm feeling it though.
Yeah, well, I mean, I like to use the word normalcy, wanting normalcy, whatever normalcy represents or is. Of course, there's no such thing. What it means mostly is that you feel a lack of something, that you're not up to some level of whatever, and so you use that as an excuse, in a sense, for your journey. I'm not this, and if I become this, then I will have that. So, but now I have to get to normal, and that's a real that's a way of poisoning your own journey, because there's no normal, and nobody's at normal. Everyone feels on some level abnormal, and until you go, well, I guess that's what I am. I am that. I am this abnormal, incomplete, unmanifested, unresolved, unrealized being. When you get to that, it's like, that's what I am. And it's not like there's more to get. Maybe there's something in being whatever you are. Just being that. Once you can accept that and don't seek for more or other, there's a kind of arrival. I mean, I always describe these rides at Disneyland, where there's all of these chairs going by, and there's a little platform you stand on that starts to move up and joins up with the chairs. So this thing is going by, and you get on this platform, and suddenly you're right there, and you transfer over onto the chair. It's like, they're moving at different speeds, but when they arrive at the same speed, there's one thing, and you can just step over and step onto the chairs that carry you on the ride. This life we live, we're always moving at different speeds from what we want and what we think we should be, and it's when you just let go, you're right there, and you just step over and you're on the ride, and we're all on the ride, every one of us. Some of us are struggling on the ride, some of us just sit back and go, wow, what a ride, what a ride. And that's kind of what you want to arrive at, where it's no longer you doing anything. You realize you're being carried. We're all being carried. Trust me, this is a much easier journey than anyone understands. And the more you surrender to it, the more it happens.
I'm beginning to really feel and get that.
I mean, you can't hold that. You just let go into it. So that if you get what you want, you get it. And if you don't get what you want, it doesn't matter. You just are, oh, wow. Whatever the day is the day. And you go, that's the day. And as long as you're struggling to get to normalcy or to the jet plane, then you're not going to have the day, because nothing's perfect because you haven't gotten that. But once you are settled into, this is what I am, this is what I have, this is what has evolved, then you go, oh, it's kind of wake up and smell the flowers. It's all in front of you, but you're always looking at the one thing or the two things or the 20 things that you don't have, and they make all of this not worth it, and that's not true. It's completely worth it. So if nothing else, just get to the point where you go, I'll take it as it comes. That's almost like awakening. It's very close. It's like, wow, I got this, and this, and this, and this, like a warm shower, or a glass of water when I'm thirsty, or, sunlight, whatever it is. It comes down to, it's that simple. And when you really wake up, it's like miracle upon miracle upon miracle upon miracle. And the miracle is what everyone else is looking at and going, it's too hot today. And you're looking at and going, wow. See, that's the difference. And that's what we're looking for. And in a way, you find it if you get past your mind. Because the mind is the thing that's saying it's not right, it's not enough, it's not this, it's not that. Or it should be this, it should be that. Get rid of that. There you are. Anybody else?
I was just going to say a quote I sent Blanche when I RSVP'd for the class was, "The only normal people are the ones you don't know very well."
Good line.
I thought, very good. I thought that was good.
The only normal people are the ones you don't know very well. Okay, we'll end on that. Thank you, guys. No class next week. We're going to go to New York and teach in Big Indian, and then we'll be back the week after. Okay, thank you.